The Parker-Hulme case is one of the most infamous murder stories in New Zealand's history. On June 22, 1954, two teenage girls, Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme, murdered Parker's mother, Honora Parker, in a brutal attack that shocked the quiet city of Christchurch. What made the case even more disturbing was not just the murder but the intense relationship between the two girls, which many believed led to the crime. Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme met in 1952 at Christchurch Girls' High School. Both girls were intelligent, creative, and isolated from their peers, and they quickly developed a deep, all-consuming friendship. They shared a love of literature, particularly fantasy fiction, and created elaborate imaginary worlds. Together, they wrote stories, poems, and plays, often set in fantasy realms where they viewed themselves as characters with superior intellect and creativity. Their bond was intense. Some described it as obsessive. As the girls became inseparable, their parents grew increasingly concerned. At the time, their closeness raised suspicions of homosexuality, which was highly stigmatized in 1950s New Zealand. However, the real issue for the parents seemed to be the emotional intensity of the relationship and its negative impact on the girls' ability to function independently. In 1954, Juliet Hulme's parents, Hilda and Henry Hulme, were going through a divorce. Juliet, who had been suffering from recurring health problems, was told she would be sent to South Africa to live with relatives. This decision was devastating to both Juliet and Pauline, who could not bear the thought of being separated. Desperate to stay together, the girls devised a plan. They wanted Pauline to accompany Juliet to South Africa, but Pauline's mother, Honora Parker, firmly opposed the idea. The girls believed that Honora stood in the way of their future and concluded that the only way to remain together was to kill her. On the afternoon of June 22, 1954, Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme lured Honora Parker to Victoria Park in Christchurch under the pretense of having tea at a nearby cafe. After finishing their outing, the three began walking along a quiet path through the park. At some point, the girls dropped an ornamental brick wrapped in a stocking, a weapon they had prepared in advance. Pauline and Juliet bludgeoned Honora to death, striking her repeatedly with the brick. In total, Honora was struck more than 20 times, with the fatal blows landing on her head. The ferocity of the attack was horrifying, suggesting deep emotional rage. After the murder, the girls ran back to the tea kiosk where they had eaten earlier, pretending that Honora had fallen and injured herself. However, the brutal injuries on Honora's body quickly revealed that her death was no accident. The police investigation moved swiftly. Pauline's diary, which was found during a search of her home, became a key piece of evidence. In the diary, Pauline detailed her feelings of hatred toward her mother and chronicled the development of the murder plot in chilling detail. "The only thing to do now is to kill Mother. It is the only thing we can do to remain together." Within days, both Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme were arrested and charged with murder. The discovery of Pauline's diary, combined with the girls' behavior following the crime, left no doubt in investigators' minds that the murder had been premeditated. The trial, which took place in August 1954, attracted massive public and media attention. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the public. It was the idea that two teenage girls from respectable families could carry out such a gruesome act. During the trial, the prosecution argued that the girls had an unhealthy, obsessive relationship and killed Honora to prevent their separation. The defense tried to suggest that the girls were mentally unbalanced, hoping to prove that they were not fully responsible for their actions. Psychiatrists testified that while the girls were emotionally disturbed, they were not legally insane and could understand the consequences of their actions. Ultimately, both were found guilty of murder. Given their ages, Pauline was 16, and Juliet was 15. They were too young to face the death penalty and were instead sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure, meaning they would serve indefinite sentences until authorities decided they were ready to be released. Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme were separated immediately after the trial and sent to different prisons. Each served 5 years before being released on the condition that they would never contact each other again. After their release, the girls disappeared from public view, assuming new identities and starting new lives. Pauline Parker moved to a rural area of New Zealand, where she lived under the name Hilary Nathan. She avoided public attention and lived quietly, working with horses and reportedly becoming a devout Roman Catholic. Juliet Hulme eventually moved to the United Kingdom and became a successful novelist under the name Anne Perry. She wrote historical crime fiction and remained active in the literary world for decades. For years, the public believed that Pauline Parker and Juliet Hulme had vanished from the world. However, in the 1990s, Juliet's identity was exposed when a journalist discovered that Anne Perry, the best-selling crime author, was, in fact, Juliet Hulme. The revelation reignited public interest in the case, leading to interviews and documentaries about the infamous crime. Perry admitted to her involvement in the murder but downplayed the emotional connection between herself and Pauline, claiming it was an intense friendship rather than a romantic relationship. Though both women have gone on to live separate, seemingly ordinary lives, the shadow of their crime has never fully lifted.